Hi, Bob.
Hey, Ben. Good to be back here in Maui.
Yeah, it's good to be talking to you again. But I have one problem that I want to share with you straight away, which is sometimes before we start talking, I rack my brains for what to be talking about, and then I get irritated by the fact that I'm racking my brains for something to talk about, because I don't really want to talk about anything in particular. I mean, we're not giving people a guide to any particular subject, which you could divide up and say, here is a authoritative guide to this. We're talking, and I just want to launch into talking. I don't want a subject, and yet I feel bad because I can't launch into something without a subject, and then I try and dream up a subject, and then I think that that's a stupid thing. So here am I already beginning with my problem of subjectlessness. Do you feel the same when you start talking to me, or do you have in your head a particular set of things that ought to be covered after last week's show?
Yeah, sometimes at the end of the show I said we need to cover it, continue that next week, but we never do that. I had that problem 20 years ago. I had to come up with something every day, but I gave it up, and I knew something would happen that would spark me. I trust it. So I had, but then sometimes just before the show I'll think, oh, I want to talk about that. So I did have that experience today, and then you wanted to begin, but what you just said is exactly what I want to talk about, and that's always working.
Yes, exactly, because if you tip off straight into where you are, then there's it's correct. You know that, in fact, subjects are distracting people from talking about the really interesting thing, which is what they'd be talking about if they just talked about what's on their minds, rather than planning and dividing everything up into boring subjects which you have to kind of listen to through, even though there's no energy in it.
That was the downfall the printing press created. It created specialisms and categories, and extremists. And I want to say that we here are doctors, scientists, jerk-offs, any kind of human activity we are performing here, not just music, not just criticism. We're including all activities, and we are addressing all activities and all limitations and all potentials. So it's exactly like McLuhan said, that language is tactile. It includes all media.
I mean, this is a cooking...
all activities.
And this is a cooking program.
Yes, we are cooking.
Yeah.
That's right, late lunch, to lunch.
Yeah.
So we have many things we can talk about, and I'm addressing everybody. Every field should notice this. And the book this is our meaning of our new manifesto on the outline for show 28. We are using the, quote, masterpiece, Phineas Wake, as our map. And Joyce began with this notion that he wasn't just writing a book. He was doing all forms of communication and engaging and addressing every possible audience, including ones that hadn't been thought of yet. That's what we're doing in the show, and that's the most comprehensive new solidarity. Yeah,
and I had this everything on top of everything all the time, and therefore what we are saying is a commentary on that everything upon everything happening all the time. And we're reasonable people who can give people a lead-in because we're talking. We're not doing something which a avant-garde contact of mine was doing, a Portuguese guy, and he was making a symphony which was all recorded symphonies he was taking and reducing or stretching to exactly an hour and then overlaying them on top of each other, and that was his artwork. And I said to him, but you'll end up with this sort of blurring, droning noise that'll be very boring to listen to. And he said, but that doesn't matter, it's the concept. And I thought, no, I want to imagine all the symphonies and all the music and everything happening all the time, at the same time, but then I'm going to talk about it in a reasonable way, like an ordinary person. I don't want to present people with with some sublime artwork that's kind of beyond them.
Yeah, we're listening. And that's why I have something to say every week, because I've been listening and paying attention to all the activities I'm engaged in all week long. Like you said, I want to talk about everything and now. Everything and now.
And that actually, this is a little pre-prepared pill that I did tell you earlier, but I'd like to say it now, because this everything that we're trying to think of is against the corruptions that happen to people who analyse. I think certain people, and you use McLuhan, I use Marx, come up with what are for us a very useful distinctions in the world. They come up with separations between things. Marx made a distinction between, say, the feudal economy and the new capitalist economy. He made a distinction. Now, dunderheads come along and take that distinction and freeze it into something very boring, where they think they can just take people and whole periods of history and stuff them in one side or the other. And we're saying, no, reality is all meshed and interconnected, or as Trotsky said, combined and uneven, that all these things are happening all the time. And these separations that we introduce analytically are useful because it allows us to follow one little strand through and see where it connects with that. But the actual stuff is really intermeshed and interesting and specific. Everywhere we look is a differently meshed version of all these different things linking together. We want to follow stuff and untangle it and simplify it and show people how it's working and how it's related. But this doesn't mean simply painting one side as white and one side as black. We want a proper picture.
That's why your books, the way you write, Ben, are so easy to write, because you just take all the conceptualizers and nail them for being stuck in their categories. That's all you did. You do this with the noise article that you mentioned last week on your Out to Lunch show.
Well, what I do is,
celebrating noise as a category.
Yeah, and therefore, what I always use to criticise thinkers is any bit of reality itself. Is, well, if you're talking about noise, let's think about the last time I experienced any noise. So I'm going to think about the bulldozer outside my house. But that means looking up recent the conflicts over the pipes that are being laid underneath the water mains in London. Thames Water is, they say everywhere that they're holding up the traffic because they're replacing London's Victorian water mains. It means going into drainage. It means getting interested in the what's happening underneath the surface of the city and researching it. And you go and you research the actual last noise that happened to you, rather than simply finding a quote from a trendy writer and stating it like a biblical text, which then reflects some other biblical text. You go and invest. Hello, Bob.
Hey, it's great to be back. I'm in Maui. You're in Maui. I'm in London. Everybody's in London. And that reminds me, I like that guy in Brussels or something who did the mashup of our stuff.
Oh, yeah.
I like what he did.
Yeah, it was quite odd to hear our voices burbling on. And
mixed in with other interesting music.
Yeah. And I'm thrown, really, because I've got to admit, I've got to tell the truth on this show. That's my idea, is to tell the truth. And the truth is that for 20 minutes we've been talking to each other without recording, thinking it was the show. And I wanted to... I began the real show that we didn't record with my own irritation with having to cover a subject, and saying that I think covering subjects is a distraction from doing what I want to do, which is talk
racking your brain
about
20 minutes beforehand. You hate that.
Yeah, I was racking my brain, and I don't want to rack my brain about something to talk about, because for me, when people decide that there's a certain topic that needs to be covered, they put the frame round it, and the subject itself becomes boring and irrelevant to the fact of talking now and listening now and doing actually what we're doing and being aware of it. It kind of erases that and sets up this so-called subject over there. Of course, a lot of people can talk about specific subjects and be very interesting, but usually because they've allowed it to be pervaded by an awareness of where they are. So secretly they're talking about where they actually are, and they're not really talking about the subject, or they're using the subject to enable themselves to talk about where they really are. And maybe one does need usually a subject to get one off into that zone, but it irritates me that we have to find these subjects, and I want to find a method of leaping straight in there. Now, do you find that the fact that I'm repeating this idea to you now has changed it at all? Or
slightly, but I remembered what I said the first time, which is an important point, and I'm glad I remembered it. I'm going to say it. I gave up trying to come up with a subject 20 or more years ago when I was on the radio in Toronto, because I knew that whatever happened at the time the mic went on, there was some events with 5 minutes before that tuned me in about what's to talk about. And so it always showed up what to talk about. I had that faith. It's almost like, when didn't Jesus tell that to the disciples, the apostles? Don't worry about what to say. When you get there, the Spirit will possess you and you'll have something to say. Remember that?
Yeah, well, the Spirit. I mean, are we in fact tapping into some spiritual zone here? Are we... I mean, I'm not a religious man, but I do realize that there's something that we do when we're talking, which is not like having to cover a subject, which is not like the usual methodical kind of grind of having to assert that one knows about a certain area and then be interviewed, like the grueling experience of having to go on something I did 12, 13 years ago, go on the BBC Radio 3 or Radio 4 and answer questions of someone asking me about jazz. And I was always bursting to tell them about the fantastic music that I'd heard the night before, which couldn't be categorized as jazz and therefore wasn't relevant to the discussion. And I was kind of stuck in this position of being an expert on jazz. And I wanted to say, but this, or I heard, something on Radio 2 the other day that made me think this. I didn't want to be the expert. The position of being the expert was, in fact, a kind of constraining device, making me into a boring person.
Exactly. The listening aspect. I knew I had something to say every time I went on the radio because I'd been listening and paying attention to what I was interested in, and that sparked new things that had to be said. It's ongoing. It's like the Holy Spirit. It's going to happen. Expression is going to come out if you don't categorize what you think you're doing. And that was the dark ages of the printing press, is that it created subjects of specialization and categorizing and led to today. The problem is specialist ills being proposed to be solved by specialist cures. So specialist cures trying to solve specialist ills. And that doesn't deal with the comprehensive everything environment we live in today and everybody lives in. So I like Finnegan's Wake as a guide because Finnegan's Wake says that you don't have to be a doctor or specialize in any of these fields, but you can address them and you can claim you're as equal in those knowledges as anybody else, because today nobody's specialism is working anymore. That's the point. This specialism doesn't work. So yeah, maybe 40 years ago when people had a certain limited idea of what medicine is, they wouldn't have come to us for medicine. But actually we now know so much that goes into dis-ease that everybody has a way to contribute to that situation. So Finnegan's Wake, as we said in last week's show blurb, is our new guide for a revolution. It's a masterpiece because we here are doing music, medicine, physics, science, garbage removal, cooking, sports, every activity is being done here because language is, as McLuhan said, tactile, includes all other forms of expression. So talking is sport, cooking, jazz, and sex. It is everything. It's the easiest thing for humans to do. It's the path of least resistance. Right? So we're celebrating the ease of our revolution.
Yeah, and then suddenly I dry up and I can't say anything at all after that, and it suddenly seems very uneasy for me to reply to that I feel an unease about your positive, benign view of everything being so fantastic, Bob.
I forgot to say we were critics. Yeah, we're also critics. We're alienated. We're very alienated. I forgot to bring in the pain. Sorry.
Yeah. Well, you've forgotten the pain, and without the pain, I haven't got an orientation. And then I expect you to then say, "Oh well, being disoriented is the best thing, and we can spin around without a compass." And this is the sublime new world of not understanding anything.
This opening is from the opening we recorded. Thought we were recording 15 minutes ago, and it didn't work. We weren't recording, and now we're into a different situation.
Completely different. We're back to can we understand the world without joy and pain in like black and white for some kind of photograph that we need to make, that's without shade we can't see the light, that without both...
Well, that's what talking is. Talking is an anesthetic. It releases the pain-joy dialectic.
Well, that's very true. When something bad happens to you, I was cycling on the wrong side of the road and the taxi driver swore at me, and it upset me, and I went to a drop-in with my children, and I didn't talk to anyone about this event. I let it fester in me, and it soured me, and it put me in a bad position. Later on, I had to go to the school to talk to the teachers about Iris, who's 4 years old, and then I confessed to them. I said, actually, I'm feeling a bit on edge because a taxi driver swore at me, and I think I was in the wrong. And they kind of went, oh yeah, we see, we understand. And immediately I felt better because I'd kind of, by actually deciding it was that, because I was in a kind of bad mood and I wasn't quite sure why. Because I tried to just dismiss this silly taxi driver and think, well, he's a nasty, foul-mouthed man, and even if somebody's in the wrong in the road, to start abusing them like that is actually bad, behaviour, and let's just forget it. But actually just trying to forget something like that allows it to fester and grow in you and produces a kind of poison which you can feel. It's like a wrong thing in your bloodstream. It kind of
dis-ease. It's dis-ease.
And speaking is the cure. And I'm interested you say that because it connects to a whole argument we had within Mad Pride when we formed Mad Pride about what the best cures are. And we were quite pragmatic about it. There have been a lot of politics in mental health of people choosing ideologically whether they're for or against drugs or for or against various kinds of therapy. And we didn't really want to nail our colours to the mast. We wanted we were more interested in having our gigs and being proud to be mad. That was the emphasis. We didn't want to get into these sectarian disputes. So we said, in various cases, if you need drugs, they can help you over difficult periods, and they may work and they may be good, and some members of Mad Pride would check themselves in. We also believe that you could use Carlsberg Special or Tennant's Strong Lager to get you through difficult periods. We weren't judgmental about the kind of things people might do to get themselves through. We didn't mind if they were proper drugs or illicit drugs or alcohol or however you could balance yourself out. We felt was fine. But one of the things that we all began to argue more and more was that actually talking was the thing that was really helpful. Talking, and here maybe it's a consideration that you, as a critic of the book and quoting McLuhan's things about people being locked in books and specialism, should consider. We also found that getting people together and writing down some of their experiences and publishing them as a book had a very good effect on a lot of us, that we felt now we were authors, that a lot of these people hadn't published before, that we'd made a book, that our stuff was exposed in public, and that had a beneficial effect. So what about that side of publishing? What do you think of that?
It's the rapist or the therapist, THERAPIST. The thing is, you can't have the rapee without the rapist and vice versa. So they go up and work together. Now, immediately when you talk about people being proud that they got a little chapbook published with their stuff, it shows you how much that is, the book publishing thing is part of our identity that came into the printing press. Because they didn't have publishing like that before the printing press. There was no private authors. Everybody just palimpsest wrote over things and all that. So here's this therapy. Now, therefore, there's all this gluttonous of creativity that's pouring out today in all these different media, and that's great. But we then have to look at someone who writes criticism, even though they're limited and pretending to be high priest of it. That's their form of therapy.
Well, no, yeah. I've got to make some distinctions here, though, because I thought that our collection, our Mad Pride collection, was helped us because we allowed out things which were considered dangerous or wrong or weren't allowed by a lot of, because there is a big system of mental health therapy which encourages people to publish poetry. It's survivors poetry, survivors of mental health, and we all said we don't want any of that. We were very against that. We came from a kind of punk angle on that. So we didn't like, when I said that talking enabled people to get over some of their things, I don't want to fall into the camp of the people who just say, well, if you write a poem about it and then get it published, you sort of get patted on the head and you feel better, because we didn't write to get patted on the head. That writing to get patted on the head is something that absolutely corrupts poetry, and you can tell it straight away in the way people read it, that they're reading something that the teacher is going to tell them that they're good for having done, and that relationship to authority we didn't have.
How did you get around that?
Because, I mean, using punk, really, using an anti-authoritarian attitude of self-expression that we knew was offensive to the authorities. That's what and doing things independently ourselves, so that we didn't have any funding to worry about, or we weren't proffering our stuff to any official to say, yes, this is good, you have been good. We did it ourselves, that DIY punk thing, and I think that was the thing that made it beneficial, that we were controlling it and arguing about what we would do collectively. And it was a collective thing. It was a bunch of people, and then we'd also all turn out on, we did a demonstration around there was a suicide, I can't remember his name, connected with the attack on Iraq. Somebody who revealed how Blair had lied and sexed up a particular, that was the phrase being used in the media, that he'd lied and changed some document, or one of his advisors had, and then somebody committed suicide. And we had
David somebody.
Yeah, and we picketed that. We turned out and pointed out how many people who committed suicide were in the troops in Iraq, and that this is never reported, and that his death was just one of many, that because he was a big name politician, everyone talked about it. But what about the soldiers who kill themselves because they can't stand the bullying and the way discipline is carried out in the British Army? So we wanted to talk about that level of oppression, and we decided to do that collectively. And so the publishing was kind of part of a group of people who were talking honestly to each other about their use of substances, something you could never do with your therapist because it might be something illegal, or you get into trouble. And we were talking honestly about whether we thought we were really crazy, or whether in fact we had seen something that was true. And it was at that level that the publishing did seem beneficial. So now we're talking about, you see, we've got away from, we're getting away from simply saying, is a book good or bad? We're starting to say, well, what is a book, and how does it fit into all the other power structures that there are?
Okay, so I was thinking about your anecdote about the first Futurist performance in London was in vaudeville. They infiltrated vaudeville. And so I wanted to think, this is what McLuhan meant by symbolism. Not image symbolism, but action symbolism, where a symbol is something presented out of its normal context, out of its normal ground, outside of its normal context. So here were these artists, they went into a vaudeville entertainment situation, presented new information out of the context. They normally would present new information to gallery. They invaded another context, the vaudeville, and presented sort of the stylistics of art, or the meaning of art, in vaudeville. And that shocked the people, or was effective, or became an interesting thing. You guys doing Mad Pride are doing that. And it's always that's really what art is presenting a symbolic action. And that is doing something not in its normal context.
That's right. Because you've got the symbol right, because you said it's not in its correct place. It's the incongruity of the symbol that makes it powerful and interesting. If it's not incongruous, if it's normal, if it's accepted as art, it's business as usual, and it's boring, and it has no aesthetic ripple in it. It's just this dead thing. And most art, the people are quite right to be skeptical about art and find it boring, because most of it is just fitting into this stuff which is has no interest in it. And this news about the Futurists, which I wasn't aware of before, came from a conversation with Ed Baxter at the Resonance Studio that I had today, and he told me he'd been looking at the list of acts on with the Futurists when they came. I always thought that they must have come to some special avant-garde salon where people would collect together to listen to these new artists from Italy. But no, they were on a bill at the London Coliseum with fire eaters and jugglers and people singing ribald songs and so on, and they were reviewed, and someone said that they were the worst variety act they'd ever seen, that Luigi Russolo's noise machines were absolutely terrible. And I found that terribly funny, because to present art in a variety show and then it be good variety wouldn't be interesting either. I mean, you've got to go there and do something really bad. That's...
They actually were trying to get people's attention away from vaudeville, which was the drug of choice back then, and get them to look at the environment differently.
Yeah.
So they didn't mind being interpreted as bad.
Yeah, and that's... not minding being interpreted as bad is the courage to be really awful. It is an essential component of all art that I've ever found interesting.
But not in the normal context where you're, like you complain about the art schools, you're allowed to be bad in that context because that's the context, and so it doesn't have any effect. The important thing is you can look at radical modernism as the artist realizing making a painting, a sculpture, or a musical composition is rather timid today compared to the new movies and car and urban landscapes that they were in the metro and all that stuff. So they said, we have to go invade other zones, not the gallery, and we'll actually present different things rather than painting. And they might spew off stuff, but the important thing was to do it in a different environment. It wasn't like Cabaret Voltaire. They were being artists in a cafe situation.
But this invading is not succumbing to its rules. I mean, because an artist like... I mean, what do you think about David Bowie, for example? Because he would seem to me an example of someone who's had an art school training looking at pop music and saying, yes, I shall invade it. But what he actually does is pop music, or a shell of pop music with art trappings. And if you explore it, I would argue you don't get any of the arguments about art that the artists have been arguing about that are important to argue about. You get reflections on what is it to be famous and what is it hollow and probably is, and alienation and so on. But these things are the result of a kind of self-consciousness about being a pop star, rather than that he kind of left behind the art when he invaded.
Exactly. I told you last time about the article in Rolling Stone about 1970s long-haired guy from England. I think he was a folk singer or something who talked about McLuhan. I thought that was interesting. The next thing I know, I'm listening to Ziggy Stardust. Someone gave me the album. I didn't know it was that guy, or maybe it did, but it wasn't prominent. I liked the music. Sort of liked the music. Then he became the White Knight or something, and his music never grabbed me. Then I went in Toronto. Some younger kids loved him, Next Generation. So we went to the big stadium and watched Bowie. It was a big extravaganza, and it was sort of nice candy, but it never made it. And so the symbolic act for me is that I understand that David Bowie attended a Zappa concert at some point, maybe in the 70s, lurked on the sidelines so he could get Adrian Belew or somebody's attention and stole them from Zappa's group. In other words, he was there not to enjoy Zappa. He was there to manipulate his own career and to find how he could appropriate something from Zappa. That's symbolic of him.
Yeah.
He should have... I mean, he never liked Zappa's music. That's a bad mark against him. If there's any rule here, any dogma, you must like Frank Zappa. Not all of them, but something. And if you go to a Zappa concert and you're worried about your career and thinking you're nuts, you haven't lost yourself. He should have forgotten why he was there.
Yeah.
Why he thought he was there.
But one of the things, I mean, it's very
specific. He now makes this stupid art stuff. I mean, I don't know that much about him, but about 7-8 years ago in New York, he put out some magazine. He's trying... The guy is, he's a frustrated Oxford Don or something. Yeah, well,
you have to be quite specific about when people get twinged by aspects of commercialization. And one of the things I have to say that at the age of 14, walking past a record shop, and they had a big display of Aladdin Sane when David Bowie's father was a member of the British Union of Fascists, and they have a lightning bolt as a symbol, and he painted it on his face, but he made himself androgynous, so it's a very sexy outline, and he's got this lightning on his face. And I walked by that, and it was for a 14-year-old who was awakening to sexuality and quite confused about which gender you're attracted to and so on. It was a very arresting image. It twinged me. I got a slight erection. And I remember that and thinking, whoa, am I gay or what's going on? That's a sexy image, but it's a man. And so because people at that period didn't generally bring to consciousness or talk about that kind of stuff, you could do a manipulation like that, and immediately you'll think, well, this guy must be a genius, because that's your way of or this guy's the devil, but it creates a kind of... this is the kind of stuff that Marilyn Manson comments on very perceptively while doing pretty much the same nonsense. But when people produce these images that affect adolescents in this sexual way, there's a kind of twinge happens which draws your attention, and it requires exposure to actual musical experience for you to see how manipulative and like any magazine cover this whole process is. It's more effective in a magazine because records are exciting things which you take to parties and they have more weight, and also a display in a record shop is a big thing to look at, whereas magazine covers, well, you might have them on a hoarding, a magazine cover, but that wouldn't be directed to you. So it was something directed to you because you're a record buyer, and then it was using magazine-style advertising within that to affect you. Now, all this stuff is being used, but if you read the music papers at the time, they didn't tell you, they didn't comment on that kind of thing. They'd just say, is David Bowie a good artist or not? Whereas attention to how they're reaching you and the adverts and all the rest of it is crucial if you're dealing with these mass media phenomena, because that's really what they're doing. They're not simply a singer writing songs to be judged next to each other as singers writing songs. They're commercial apparitions.
Yeah, now I haven't read every interview with Bowie, but he probably didn't reveal that's what he was doing. Whereas Zappa always talked about what he was doing. Even right on the liner notes, he said, this song is designed to attract blah, blah, blah. You know what I mean?
And he talks about what everybody else is doing. I mean, the song Punk is Whips is about exactly this kind of androgynous twinging, because it's a dramatization of Terry Bozzio, his drummer, jacking off to pictures of, and it's not David Bowie, but it's a heavy metal Angel, who put on bouffant hairdos and proved that glamour is a complete product of hairdos and makeup, and you could be male or female, it didn't really matter if you're going to have a glamorous picture of you.
Yeah, it's interesting is your reaction to the Bowie cover. Is that art not in the right place, or what is art for? It's not even art. It is something happening out of context, or is it just effective subliminal impact?
I think, it's not something I would try and get rid of in society. I mean, displays of sexuality and using that seem to me to open into a world of freedom, because if it's public, then we can all talk about it. But if it's not followed up by the ability to understand it and talk about it, then it becomes manipulative.
It's just focusing on sex. And
So the kind of solution to it I want is not the banning of the cover or the display, the fear of it, which actually increases its potency. It would be more the ability to mock it, which you don't have if everybody gets outraged morally by it. You're not allowed to.
And so Bowie never mocked himself fully. He always stayed within the glamour, hypnotic image. That's why his White Knight and all those phases weren't totally effective, because he couldn't go all the way in his self-critique of what he was revealing.
Yeah, he lacks the silliness that is there in every very intelligent person.
Exactly. That's the nub of the matter there. He lacked the silliness. He did not have the James McDougall virus.
I love the way you use James McDougall as your citation of virtue. Maybe you should come to England and hang out with him for a bit. He's left London. The police told him he was probably going to get he was probably going to get killed if he carried on living in the way he was and talking in the way he was, because he was very confrontational and honest, but also completely drunk and completely anarchic in his behaviour, and often got himself beaten up by the things he'd say to people on the street and so on. And the police advised him to get, and he's got out of London, and he has kind of sorted himself out quite a lot. He's been listening to Late Lunch Without a Lunch, which is interesting, and he's developing, he's changing. But it'd be very interesting if you talk to him directly. Maybe we could arrange some kind of Skype thing with James McDougall.
Yeah, because all I know is the footage you showed me in April 2008, and I thought it was something vital going on there as he was ranting away at, I guess it was a Mad Pride concert.
Yeah,
right?
that was James McDougall on stage with his band Ape Shit at a Mad Pride promotion at the Bull and Gate.
And I love the way the band was in sync with them. They were really good with them.
Yeah.
And
well,
I've done some of that ranting in musical places too.
I mean,
he's good at it.
In places where I've appeared as an expert on modern music, I've said that Ape Shit solved problems of the distinction between reggae and punk that hadn't been achieved anywhere else. were only achieved really by going backwards in time to ska, which I adore, but this was going forward to chaos music, and you can't really tell whether it's reggae or punk. It's heavy and disturbed, and the rhythm keeps altering all the time. The drummer has got that ability to overcome the beat that you're in with another beat, so it always sounds like beat music, and yet you can't tap your foot to it because you're being completely changed all the time. And
they were very skillful.
Yeah,
it was great that they allowed themselves to be with him.
Yeah, and the fact that they got him out of. He was actually incarcerated in a mental hospital that day, and it was the band who got him out to play. But obviously, when you're dealing with someone, it's a very volatile set of people. So,
this gets into this thing about you guys wanting to express yourself with the chapbooks, the Mad Pride authors. Okay, the drama of civilization, the drama of interaction, not even civilization, is talking. So I listen to you, and I'm getting sparked by what you say, but I can let you finish your sentence, and then am I mature by holding back and not saying something I could say at certain phrases you said, and then I wait, and then I forget what I was going to say, and then I got to come up with something else. That essential interaction, the dialectic of human consciousness between the first humans, Mutt and Jute and Finnegan's Wake, that is what we're talking about. When do I let go? When do I release? How much do I be concerned about invading someone else's space? How much do I let them mouth off? You know what I mean? That is the ongoing drama of life. And James is seen as someone who's not acknowledging other people properly. You know what I mean? He's not. He's expressing himself in relation to other people's worlds inappropriately. Now, we humans do not want a standard routine and law or pattern of how to interact. They get bored with it. So we want the person who interrupts you or does something. That's the funny, absurd thing of communication.
Yeah. I mean,
you can't determine what's happening.
Well, this is the point of Theodor Adorno's musicology. He's trying to explain to people that what's thought of as music is something pretty, which is something you've heard before. And he's saying, no. Actually, what music is, the unpretty thing that you've never heard before. It's that bit. It's the brick wall that hits you. It's the disturbance. It's the noise which actually is the music. And
I would say that he specialized too much in concentrating on music. I don't need music all the time. Some other kind of experience is way better than hearing music at that moment.
Yeah, but I'm not weighing up music versus other things. But there is a difference between experts who limit themselves. I mean, there's something that might look like that, but is completely different, which is the absolute obsessive who digs into one spot and finds the universe in there.
Well, that's okay. But the thing is, why tell other people about
Well, no, I don't think that's... No, Bob, I don't think that's just okay. I think it's crucial. I think the absolute... You see, I think Adorno's complete obsession with music, it actually invents a whole politics and philosophy via concentrating on what he liked or didn't like in the next bar in somebody's composition at that date. And
what was good about him, he made his obsessions universally important for everybody and made it revolutionary. All right? He applied it to everything.
Well, he's involved with the Secret Service. He's has a large part in the restructuring of Germany after the Second World War.
And according to LaRouche, he set up the whole propaganda for pop radio with the report he did with Paul somebody at Columbia University. The Columbia University Radio Project was mapping out how to create top 40 radio. Adorno was part of that.
I mean, the thing is that LaRouche on that topic is completely wrong. I mean, I've read the book that Theodor Adorno wrote when he came to America called Current of Music on Radio. And it's just exactly the opposite of that. He was meant to be working with an esteemed sociologist who came from Vienna, where sociology was invented, on radio and what would be the best way of developing American radio, which is all to do with demographics and the interests of big business, essentially. This guy was involved with proving to businesses that there were certain listeners who liked certain kinds of music, who played this kind of music, they'd tune in and you could sell sell things to them with advertising. And
was that Lagerfeld? What was it?
I can't remember. I've got the book on my shelf. It doesn't really matter. If you look at Current of Music by Adorno, there he is. Would it help if I got it off the shelf?
Yeah, because who did he do Authoritarian Personality with? Who's the other guy he wrote?
But the thing is that
Horkheimer. There's Horkheimer.
But the thing is, it should be a screwball comedy, because Adorno's brought in to develop this theory, and he's absolutely horrified. He says, but if you listen to a symphony on the radio, you haven't got the proper dynamics of the concert hall. You can't understand it. It'll sound like something wishy-washy and boring.
You're saying he was the Ben Watson of the radio project.
And they were saying, get this Adorno out of here, because he was saying music will just appear painted on the sound stripe. He said the most interesting thing about the radio is the buzz that happens when you turn it on. That you click on the radio and you get this sound. Now, merely to go and paint, a faint recording of Beethoven's Fifth on top of that is like sticking a transfer of a Grandmaster on a biscuit tin and saying this is where art should go. Whereas he's a modernist. He says, no, if you're making biscuit tins, you've got to think, what is this metallic object? What kind of metals do we have? There's biscuits inside. How do we show there are biscuits inside? Let's design the whole thing properly. And similarly, he said, with the radio, composers have to start composing with the sound of the radio. They should be composing stuff with the crackle that you hear when you turn the radio on. Now, obviously, his demand is answered for me by electronic music, which is rock and roll and blues, and everybody who picks up, that when you hear an electric guitar, you are hearing the sound of electricity. Adorno never quite got. No, he never got onto that. We have to complete Adorno. He's limited. So I think LaRouche is quite completely wrong on Adorno and radio.
Who, LaRouche is?
Yeah, if he thinks that he was planning Pop 40 radio, he's doing the opposite. I mean,
LaRouche is generally wrong about everything within normal cliche awareness.
Okay.
Any field. Plato, he gets it all wrong. He rejects Benjamin Jowett's translation of Plato, and he has his own translation. But what's interesting, when you have a glut of information, he is the James McDougall of intellectual life, of left hemisphere life. And so you look into him to see, well, he does manage to make some interesting patterns. And so you hear about the radio project, and the Adorno factor is wrong, but you hear about what that set up, which you just agree with LaRouche about the purpose of the project, which was to align with business. Right?
Yeah. Well, isn't it funny the way the mind works, Bob? As soon as I picked up the volume, the name Lazarsfeld came into my head, and now I look within the pages of the book, and it's Lazarsfeld. Paul Lazarsfeld. Yeah.
Paul Lazarsfeld.
Lazarsfeld. Yeah, lived from 1901 to 1976.
And he was the authority. He was the one that Adorno.
Yeah, I mean, he brought sociology from Vienna to New York, so he's an important guy. But his
the Frankfurt School probably was.
No, absolutely not. He's a positivist sociologist, more like Karl Popper or something like that. But he, the dispute between them is the dispute between somebody who really believes in classical music and somebody who's quite pragmatic about it. Lazarsfeld is quite cynical about it. As long as it gets this demographic and these people like it and you can sell this to him, then it's great, it's all working. And Adorno comes along with his, but they have not understood the meaning of the Fifth Symphony if they do not all jump out of their seats when they hear.
Hey, this is great.
Hello Bob for the third time.
Yes, welcome to Maui again, Ben.
And have we finally chased the subject out of the room? Are we now really talking?
Yes, we're talking now about how Adorno was the odd man out, and they made an accident, mistake hiring him, and he caused a lot of problems. And
he wanted composers to play with the sound stripe of the radio, with the actual sound that you get when you turn it on, the sound of electricity. And something he never realized was that Muddy Waters did that.
Yes, and Lazarsfeld fired him because of that, or they at least tried to get rid of him. And the interesting, I was wondering if there was an institute that didn't go for the money, the big bucks like Frankfurt School, and we couldn't come up with any, or maybe the Lettrus or Wyndham Lewis. But the interesting thing is it didn't matter, because R&B, the black music, was the anti-environment to the think tank that Lazarsfeld was trying to market.
Yeah, they were the aspect of radio, which produced something which the corporations tried to ride, but spread this virus of anti-authoritarianism around the world, and that's the virus we want to ride and make aware of itself. That's why we're talking rather than playing records on this show. We believe in that change that has happened to people, but it seems to have got stuck in its own ether. It seems to be congratulating itself and getting weaker, and we want to comment on what that was and introduce some ideas into it. We want to ride it with talk and ideas, because we've always found that the way we really like music, we love going to gigs and they give us great inspiration, but for me the favourite part of the whole thing is sitting around with my friends talking about the records as they're happening. And I feel that this level of conversation, which enables you to combine erotic play and affection and dance and eating and drinking and playing your music and talking, has never been recognised. That critics try and keep everything to, was that a good concert, was that a good record? But the really important thing was it a good record to have a good time with? I think only George Clinton recognises that with his little Pedro Bell's little cartoons on the Funkadelic albums about people pulling records out and saying, hey, that looks like a good album, have you got any weed, let's come round to my house. That side of the use of music, which is the true use of music by the users, what we use it for. And I've always felt that the level of discussion that you get when people are really enjoying themselves and able to talk honestly about the music and how it makes them feel has never been reflected enough in anything written down or broadcast, that we need to publicise that energy and that level of meshing of the different kinds of thing that you're doing, because you're doing autobiography and you're doing musicology and you're doing history and you're doing everything at once. Yeah.
It's interesting as you say that. I was thinking now, since you say Clinton's the first to talk about that, George Clinton, Zappa in a way discouraged that with his excellence? Did Beefheart discourage that? That's an interesting point. Whether
Zappa produced music that you can't consume in any other way. I mean, Frank Zappa's records have always produced arguments. Whenever I put them on, have always, I mean, sometimes in bad ways. I mean, they chase idiots out the house. They produce dissension. People groan. I mean, the wrong kind of. It's taken me a lot of times through my life to suddenly realise that actually I don't like the people who didn't let me play the records, that say the records are bad. But
so Zappa works.
I think so. They were never convenient records to play. They were always inconvenient and scene destroying in many ways.
So maybe that's why people have been a little discouraged with Frank in the late 70s, early 80s, that phase. I think you use it in your book. He goes into corporate rock. That was maybe, it was too excellent or too good or too niche marketed, so it didn't encourage discussion anymore. Maybe that's what the complaint was.
Well, it always encouraged discussion where I was, but then it's very specific what I'm talking about.
And so later, I mean, the 80s music was really good, but did it encourage discussion? I think it just encouraged awe. You actually liked it. AWE, awe.
Right, yeah, well.
It's constant. But you were excited after it, and you found someone, so maybe that's a going down a rabbit hole, red herring. Back to this point about encouraging interaction. That's why people, the symbolic action that, this is what I want to say. The cliches that you see in niche marketed entertainment all over the place, that's what you're bothered by. It doesn't encourage discussion in any way because it's too familiar. There's something about that. As a matter of fact, it's so bad, maybe is the kids who film themselves giving each other blowjobs and all that and then put it up in their high school webs, circuits, is that defeating conversation? Is that better than conversation? Is conversation going towards that? I mean, just occurred to me that maybe they've lost that whole sense of the power of interacting with the mouth.
Well, the best conversations always end in blowjobs, haven't you found?
Yes, that's true. So I think these kids bypass the conversation, get to the conclusion immediately. It's part of speeded up society.
Yeah. But the problem, the thing is that everything doesn't end with the blowjob. I mean, because of its status within the society, everybody thinks that the world finishes then, but there is still a world after the blowjob.
Yeah, and that's what I was trying to say at the beginning. We don't specialize in any obvious conclusion. You can't determine where you began. You can't determine when you're ending. So you still listen to see what's going on. You still be engaged with what's happening. So you would not conclude. I mean, I've had some of my best conversations after the blowjob.
Yeah, and we're the lone supporters of the idea that finding the world interesting is really the thing to be pursuing, and not these temporary gratifications. Not that we're against the temporary gratification; we're all for them. But
they're escaping from the boredom because they don't know how to talk, or they're not interested enough in life to talk about it. They got fooled and think there's nothing to talk about.
Yeah, I mean, it's taken me a long time to realise that everybody has always thought that I was obsessed with sexuality. I wasn't. I was obsessed with talking about sexuality.
Yes, and you found that very central activity, which that's the idea, that Finnegan's Wake he shows language permeating every activity. That's what he does.
And you can't read Finnegan's Wake without talking about it. I mean, it's not a book with which you can fall silent and read. You've got to, read out bits, and you've got to show it to people, and everybody immediately has a point of view on whether or not they can read it and whether it should have been written or not. Whether or not they have any literary training.
The capital O other. It's the final other. It usurps all incomprehensible mystery phenomena, almost. There's a few things like parallel world traveling that might overdo that, but within normal secular activity or abnormal, Finnegan's Wake remains the outsider, the other. It's not really comprehensible. You can't categorize it.
No, but that's true of everything. If people would only realise it. I mean, everything is perpetually fascinating and inexplicable if you paid it enough attention to realise how fascinating and inexplicable it actually is.
It waxes and wanes. What you're interested in waxes and wanes. And you're always shifting. It's always shifting what you're enjoying or what you're bothered by.
Yeah.
And therefore you can't say where you're at. And nobody can. But you're always talking to find out where you are temporarily.
That's right. And it's
probing.
And the casting light is the satisfying thing. It's the working with it and making it clearer, which is the purpose. Because people confuse. If I say to people, well, the whole point is it's inexplicable, they think I like mystery, or I like murkiness, or I like the inexplicable. I'm very happy that everything's inexplicable because I can spend my whole time explaining things. But I do go out and find the thing that's inexplicable and turn it into something explicable. I do find that light is shed, and I use the people that I adore are people who shine light on things. I love that process. But what I enjoy is that I don't feel the depression that some people seem to feel, that somehow the light has been switched on everywhere and we look down at a boring universe. The idea it's all neon lit now with modern science, we all know where everything is, and isn't it tedious, isn't it a tragedy? And I say these people are just not looking, they're looking at the abstractions that people have invented to explain the world and not looking at the specificity, because each specific thing requires its own explanation.
You can explain it. It's a temporary wisdom, a temporary categorization, and the printing press froze that. But the wonderful thing about the electric age is it unfreezes these things. You can't figure out what's happening.
We have different terms for it. You see, I think it's the wonderful thing of what capitalism has delivered in delivering us a class of people who have no truck with the organising principle of the society they're in. We don't have to defend it. We're free to enjoy its fruits and to network in irresponsible ways according to how the society is actually governed, and use the fruits of it and network in a way which is free and democratic and trusting. That's the great thing. It's communism. Printing press or the electronic ether for me are kind of names that McLuhan and his fuzziness about social developments used, and there are many insights there, but I want to translate your McLuhanite technical media terms into real social terms.
Well, that's what I'm doing. I remind the book people, the categorizers, the specialists, how obsolete they are, and I use McLuhan to point that out, and then you get into living. You don't point out McLuhan. But there was another idea. I forget. Say something. Are we near the 12 minutes?
But this living, we're nearing the end. We've got our eyes on the clock, ladies and gentlemen, because of this strange way this program has developed. But when you say really living, I think you're appreciating that you are appreciating a kind of nascent communism, Bob.
That's what I wanted to say. Deleuze and Guattari's nomading, wasn't that what they meant? Didn't they have that values in that concept that you were just saying?
Well,
the parasite use what is.
Yeah, but the thing is that nomads aren't free; they're following their sheep.
Yeah,
and so the whole fashion from Deleuze and Guattari about praising nomadism, I thought it was actually saying no madism, and as a member of Mad Pride, I had to object.
That's good
because
No, that's good. The thing about you and I are similar, Ben, in that we never stop questioning or responding to what is. That's the thing. So we're not categorizable. We are Finnegans. You can't figure out, but we are categorizable if it's necessary to be a rupture or to be in any environment or to be a symbolic action.
Well, it'd be quite nice if someone out there did try and categorize us. I'm looking forward to, reviews favourable or hostile. I'd like somebody to explain to us what it's doing and to see through us. I'd like to see a denunciation or a parody of us, tomorrow.
Well, we would include it. I would agree with the denunciation. Any denunciation someone comes up with, I agree with, and we'll still be here confounding and explaining the mystery landscape. It can be done. You can comprehend the incomprehensible, the ultimate mystery. That's the amazing thing. That's why we're humans.
Good. Thank you for that, Bob. I'll think about it for a week and talk to you again. Bye.
Bye.